On the night Lena Hart believed she'd finally escaped her past, standing in a penthouse suite surrounded by champagne and rose petals, her new husband, the most feared crime boss in the city, handed her divorce papers. The wedding had ended 2 hours ago. The signatures were still wet on the marriage certificate. Victor Calder's cold eyes held no apology as he told her he loved someone else. By dawn, Lena would learn the brutal truth. In the criminal underworld, a discarded wife isn't just abandoned, she becomes the most dangerous kind of liability. If you want to see how Lena transforms from a discarded bride into the most powerful woman in the city's underworld, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The Grandeur Hotel's crystal ballroom had never looked more beautiful. Thousands of white roses cascaded from the ceiling, their petals drifting through air thick with expensive perfume and carefully contained violence. Lena Hart stood at the edge of the emptying dance floor, watching the last guests file out under the watchful eyes of men in tailored suits whose jackets didn't quite hide their shoulder holsters. She was 26 years old, wearing a custom Vera Wang gown that cost more than her mother's house, and she had just married the most dangerous man in the city. Victor Calder. Even his name made people lower their voices. Lena smoothed her hands over the silk bodice, feeling the rapid flutter of her heartbeat beneath her palms. The reception had been flawless, a carefully choreographed performance of power and legitimacy. 400 guests, half of them criminals pretending to be businessmen, the other half businessmen who'd made their fortunes dancing with criminals. City councilmen had shaken Victor's hand, a state senator had given a toast, and through it all, Victor had played his part perfectly. The attentive groom, the man transformed by love. Lena had almost believed it herself. "Mrs. Calder." The voice came from her left. Dmitri, Victor's head of security, a wall of a man with a scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. "Mr. Calder is waiting for you upstairs." Her stomach tightened. The penthouse suite. The wedding night. She'd known what she was getting into when she agreed to this marriage. Victor Calder didn't do anything without a reason, and love had never been mentioned in their brief courtship. But he'd been kind, distant, but never cruel. He'd promised her protection, stability, a life where she wouldn't have to look over her shoulder every time she left her apartment. After 2 years of running from her past, that had sounded like salvation. "Of course," Lena said, lifting her skirts with practiced grace. "Thank you, Dmitri." The elevator ride to the penthouse took 43 seconds. Lena counted each one, watching the numbers climb, trying to slow her breathing. The mirrors lining the elevator showed her reflection from every angle. A stranger in white lace, dark hair swept up in an elaborate style. Makeup applied by professionals who knew how to make a woman look like she belonged in this world. She looked like a bride. She looked like she fit. The illusion was almost perfect. The elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse suite. Lena stepped out into a space that looked like something from a fantasy. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, rose petals scattered across marble floors, candles flickering on every surface. Champagne chilled in a silver bucket. The lights of the city spread out below like a blanket of stars. And standing at the window, silhouetted against the skyline, was Victor. He'd removed his jacket. His white shirt was crisp, perfectly tailored to his lean frame. He stood with his hands in his pockets, staring out at the city he controlled with the same detached efficiency he brought to everything. "Close the door," he said, without turning around. Lena did. The soft click echoed in the vast space. "It's beautiful," she said, moving further into the room. Her heels clicked against the marble. "The suite. Everything. Thank you." Victor didn't respond. He remained perfectly still, a statue carved from ice and calculation. Lena's chest tightened. She'd learned to read silence during her years of survival, and this silence had edges. "Victor." She stopped a few feet behind him, close enough to see his reflection in the glass. "Is something wrong?" He turned then, and the expression on his face made her blood run cold. There was no warmth there, no tenderness, no hint of the man who'd smiled at her during the ceremony, who danced with her in front of 400 witnesses, who'd promised to honor and protect her. This was the Victor Calder the city feared, the man who'd built an empire on calculated brutality and strategic violence. "Sit down, Lena," he said, gesturing to the white sofa near the window. It wasn't a request. She sat, her dress pooling around her like a cloud. Her hands found each other in her lap, fingers lacing together to hide their trembling. Victor crossed to a desk in the corner, Louis XIV, probably authentic, and picked up a manila folder. He carried it back to where she sat and placed it on the glass coffee table in front of her. "What is this?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Open it." Lena reached for the folder with hands that wanted to shake. She pulled back the cover and saw the first page of a legal document, dense with text and official seals. Petition for dissolution of marriage. The words didn't make sense at first. Her brain refused to process them, to connect them to the reality of sitting in a wedding suite, still wearing her gown, the taste of champagne and wedding cake still on her tongue. "I don't understand," she said slowly, looking up at Victor. He'd moved to the bar, pouring himself 2 fingers of whiskey with the same precision he brought to everything. "It's very simple. I want a divorce." The room tilted slightly. Lena gripped the folder, using it to anchor herself to reality. "We've been married for 3 hours. 3 hours and 27 minutes. Victor took a measured sip of his drink. "The papers are ready. Sign them tonight and you'll be compensated. Generously. A lump sum payment, monthly allowance for 2 years, and a fully furnished apartment in any neighborhood you choose. Within reason." Lena stared at him, searching for some sign that this was a test, a cruel joke, something other than exactly what it appeared to be. But Victor's face remained impassive, businesslike. He could have been discussing a merger. "Why?" The question came out as barely a whisper. "Because I'm in love with someone else." The words landed like physical blows. Lena flinched, then hated herself for showing weakness. "You married me today," she said, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "You stood in front of 400 people and made vows. Vows I had every intention of honoring when I made them." Victor set down his glass with a soft click. "The situation changed." "When? When did the situation change?" 2 weeks ago." 2 weeks. Lena's mind raced backward through the past 14 days. The final dress fitting, the rehearsal dinner, Victor's carefully chosen gifts, a diamond bracelet, a first edition of her favorite book, a key to the penthouse with her name engraved on it. All of it had been theater. "Who is she?" Lena asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. "Irina Volkov." The name hit like a bullet. Lena knew it. Everyone who'd spent time in Victor's world knew it. Irina Volkov, daughter of the Volkov crime family that controlled the ports and half the shipping industry on the East Coast. Beautiful, ruthless, and engaged to Victor 5 years ago, before some catastrophic falling out that had nearly sparked a war between their families. "Irina Volkov wants you dead," Lena said flatly. "Everyone knows that. Irina wants what she's always wanted, power and control. She's willing to set aside old grudges for the right alliance." Victor's expression didn't change. "Our families merging would create the most powerful criminal organization on the eastern seaboard. The old men have been pushing for it for years." "Then why marry me?" "Because 2 months ago, Irina was engaged to Konstantin Fedorov. The alliance wasn't possible." Victor picked up his glass again, studying the amber liquid. "I needed a wife for other reasons. You were suitable, uncomplicated." The word stung more than it should have. Uncomplicated. Like she was an accessory, a placeholder, something to be used and discarded when a better option came along. "What changed?" Lena heard herself ask, though part of her screamed to stop gathering information, to sign the papers and run. "Konstantin died. Car accident, 2 weeks ago." Victor's tone suggested he knew exactly how convenient that accident had been. "Irina reached out the next day. The alliance is back on the table." Lena's hands tightened on the folder until the edges cut into her palms. "So you married me this morning knowing you'd divorce me tonight." "I considered postponing the wedding, but that would have raised questions, created suspicion. Better to proceed as planned and handle the dissolution quietly." "Quietly?" Lena laughed, the sound harsh and brittle. "You think divorcing your wife on your wedding night will be quiet?" "I think it will be handled with discretion, and anyone who speaks about it indiscreetly will regret it." The threat in Victor's voice was mild, almost casual. That made it more terrifying. You'll sign a non-disclosure agreement along with the divorce papers. You won't speak about our marriage, our divorce, or anything you may have learned about my business operations during our association. And if I refuse, Victor's eyes went flat and cold. Don't. The single word carried enough weight to crush bones. Lena understood then, with perfect clarity, that she was having this conversation at Victor's discretion. She could sign the papers and walk away with money and a chance at rebuilding her life. Or she could refuse and, what? Disappear? Have an accident like the conveniently deceased Constantine? She'd thought she understood the world she was marrying into. She thought she was prepared for the reality of being Victor Calder's wife. But sitting here in silk and lace, surrounded by roses and champagne and the trappings of romance, Lena realized she'd understood nothing at all. "There's a pen in the folder," Victor said, returning to the window. "Sign the documents. Dmitri will witness them and arrange your transportation." Lena looked down at the papers, at the neat legal language that would dissolve her marriage before the sun rose. Her signature line waited at the bottom of each page, marked with small red X's. She thought about her mother, dead 3 years now, from the cancer that had eaten through their savings and left Lena with nothing but debt and desperation. She thought about the men who'd come looking for her when she couldn't pay, the jobs she'd lost, the apartment she'd fled in the middle of the night. She thought about Victor's offer 6 months ago, delivered through an intermediary. "Marry me, and you'll never have to run again." It had been a lie. All of it. "Where will I go?" she asked quietly. "I've arranged an apartment in Riverside. It's secure, anonymous. You'll live there for the next 2 years while the monthly payments continue. After that, you're free to relocate wherever you choose." Riverside. The neighborhood was 40 minutes outside the city, isolated and quiet. A place to hide unwanted things. "Am I allowed visitors?" Victor's pause was almost imperceptible. "It would be better if you kept a low profile, for your own safety." "My safety." Lena's laugh was hollow. "You're worried about my safety. A discarded wife is leverage, Lena. In this world, leverage gets used. The fewer people who know where you are, the better." Understanding crashed over her like a wave. This wasn't just about divorce. This was about erasure. Victor wasn't just ending their marriage. He was removing her from the board entirely, tucking her away where she couldn't be found, couldn't be questioned, couldn't become a liability. In Victor's world, she realized with growing horror, a discarded wife wasn't just abandoned. She became a target, a weak point, something that needed to be controlled. The apartment in Riverside wasn't protection. It was a cage. "What if I don't sign?" The question came out before Lena could stop it. Victor turned from the window, and for the first time that night, something like emotion flickered across his face. It might have been pity. "Then I'll make you sign," he said simply. "I've built my life on making people do things they don't want to do. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Lena looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the truth she'd been too desperate to see before. Victor Calder was a man who viewed people as assets or obstacles. She'd been an asset when he needed a wife. Now she was an obstacle to a more profitable alliance. Nothing she said would change that. No plea, no logic, no appeal to the kindness he'd shown her during their courtship would matter because that kindness had never been real. It had been part of the performance, another tool in his arsenal. She reached for the pen. "Smart choice," Victor said, turning back to the city. Lena uncapped the pen, her hand steady now. Rage had a way of burning through fear, leaving something harder behind. She signed the first page, then the second, then the third. Each signature was neat, controlled, giving away nothing of the storm building in her chest. When she finished, she capped the pen and stood, leaving the folder on the table. Victor's back was still to her, his attention on the sprawling city below. "I have one question," Lena said. "What?" "Did you ever care about me at all? Even a little?" Victor's shoulders shifted, the only sign he'd heard. When he spoke, his voice was almost gentle. "I cared that you were useful. That's more than most people get." Lena nodded, though he couldn't see her. She smoothed her hands over her dress one last time, feeling the silk and lace that had cost a fortune and meant nothing. "Goodbye, Victor." She walked to the door, her heels clicking against marble, her head high. Behind her, Victor remained at the window, a silhouette against the city lights. He didn't turn around, didn't watch her leave. Why would he? She was already gone in the only way that mattered. The elevator descended in silence. Lena watched the numbers drop, feeling the weight of everything that had just happened pressing down on her shoulders. By the time the doors opened to the lobby, Dmitri was waiting with two other guards and a car idling at the curb. "Mrs. Calder." He still used the title, though it was already meaningless. "Your apartment is ready. We'll take you there now." Lena looked at the car, at the guards, at the lobby that had been filled with flowers and celebration just hours ago. Through the glass doors, she could see the city, vast, indifferent, full of people who had no idea that a woman in a wedding dress had just signed away her life. "Give me a moment," she said. Dimitri's expression suggested that moments were not something she was entitled to, but he stepped back, giving her space. Lena walked to the entrance, pushing through the glass doors into the cool night air. The street was quiet at this hour, the city holding its breath between yesterday and tomorrow. She lifted her face to the sky, searching for stars she knew she wouldn't find. Too much light pollution, too much everything. "Ma'am," Dimitri's voice held a warning. "We need to go." Lena turned and found him standing in the doorway, backlit by the hotel's golden glow. Behind him, the ballroom where she'd gotten married was dark, the roses already starting to wilt. "I'm ready," she said. But she wasn't. Not really. As she walked toward the car, her wedding dress trailing behind her like a ghost, Lena Hart understood that, ready or not, her life had just been reduced to one brutal truth. In Victor Calder's world, she had been useful, and now she was not. The car pulled away from the Grandeur Hotel at 3:47 a.m., carrying Lena toward an anonymous apartment in Riverside where she would wait. For what? She didn't yet know. Behind her, the city glittered with promises it had no intention of keeping. Above her, the sky remained stubbornly empty of stars. And in the penthouse suite she'd occupied for less than an hour, Victor Calder stood at the window with his phone to his ear, already moving on to his next acquisition, his next alliance, his next carefully calculated move in a game where people like Lena were nothing more than pieces to be played and discarded. The only question that mattered now was this: would she stay discarded? Or would she find a way to become something Victor Calder had never anticipated? Something he couldn't control, couldn't predict, couldn't simply remove from the board when she became inconvenient? In the back seat of the car, Lena stared at her reflection in the window and felt something cold and hard crystallizing in her chest. Not quite anger, not quite grief. Something sharper, more dangerous. The beginning of resolve. The apartment in Riverside was exactly what Victor had promised. Secure, anonymous, and utterly soulless. Lena stood in the center of the living room as dawn broke over the city, still wearing her wedding dress, and surveyed her new prison. Beige walls, beige carpet, furniture that looked like it had been ordered from a catalog with instructions to select the most forgettable options available. The windows faced a parking lot and a line of identical buildings, each one designed to blend into its surroundings so completely that even the people who lived there would struggle to describe them. Dmitri had delivered her to the door at 4:30, handed her a key and a phone. "New number," he'd explained, the old one was disconnected, and left without another word. The lock had clicked behind him with a finality that made her stomach turn. She'd walked through the space slowly, cataloging the details. Kitchen stocked with basics. Bedroom with a queen bed and empty closet, bathroom with fresh towels and generic toiletries. Everything she might need for basic survival, nothing that suggested anyone actually lived here. On the kitchen counter, she'd found an envelope. Inside, a debit card in her name and a single sheet of paper with typed instructions. Monthly deposit of $5,000 begins on the 1st. Lump sum payment of $100,000 will be transferred within 72 hours. Do not contact Mr. Calder or any of his associates. Do not leave the Riverside area without prior approval. Do not discuss your previous relationship with anyone. Violation of these terms will result in immediate termination of all financial support and other consequences. Other consequences. Lena had read the words 3 times before folding the paper and placing it back in the envelope. The message was clear. She could have money and safety, or she could have freedom, not both. Now, as pale sunlight crept across the beige carpet, Lena reached behind her back and began working the buttons of her wedding dress. There were 47 of them, tiny pearls sewn into silk loops. It took her 20 minutes to undo them all with shaking fingers. When the dress finally pooled at her feet, she stepped out of it and left it there, a puddle of white lace and broken promises in the middle of the living room floor. She walked to the bathroom in her slip and stood under the shower until the water ran cold. The first 3 days passed in a haze. Lena slept in fragments, waking every few hours to the disorienting silence of the apartment. No traffic noise, no sirens, no sounds of neighbors living their lives through thin walls. Just oppressive, carefully maintained quiet. She ate because her body demanded it: toast, canned soup, instant coffee. She sat by the window and watched people come and go from the parking lot, normal people with normal lives who had no idea that the woman in 4B had been married and divorced on the same night. On the fourth day, the $100,000 appeared in her account. Lena stared at the number on her phone screen and felt nothing. On the fifth day, she started to notice the patterns. The black sedan that parked across the street every morning at 7 and left at 6. The same man, always in a dark suit, always with a phone to his ear. The woman who walked her dog past Lena's building 3 times a day, never quite looking up at the windows, but somehow always aware. The maintenance worker who seemed to find reasons to be in the hallway outside her apartment more often than maintenance required. Victor's people, making sure she stayed where she was put. On the 6th day, Lena opened her laptop, the one thing Dmitri had brought from her old apartment along with 2 suitcases of clothes, and began to research. Irina Volkov's engagement to Victor Calder was announced in the society pages 7 days after Lena's wedding. The article was carefully worded, mentioning Victor's previous marriage only in passing as recently dissolved by mutual agreement. There were photos of Irina at various charity events, always immaculate, always surrounded by people who looked slightly afraid of her. Lena studied the woman's face, searching for whatever Victor saw there that had made her worth destroying a marriage over. Irina was beautiful in a sharp, calculated way, high cheekbones, ice blue eyes, a smile that never quite reached them. She wore her power like other women wore jewelry, prominently displayed and impossible to ignore. The Volkov family controlled shipping, imports, and a dozen legitimate businesses that served as fronts for less legitimate operations. Irina had taken over as head of the family 3 years ago when her father died. Heart attack, officially, though rumors suggested otherwise. Since then, she'd expanded their territory, eliminated rivals, and built a reputation for being more ruthless than any of the men she'd displaced. She and Victor would be perfect together. 2 predators circling the same territory, recognizing each other's strength. Lena slammed the laptop shut and walked to the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of water with hands that wanted to throw the glass against the wall instead. 3 weeks into her exile, Lena realized she was going to lose her mind if she didn't find something to do. The money Victor had given her was enough to live on, but sitting in the apartment day after day, watching the surveillance rotate shifts, was a different kind of death. She needed work, purpose. Something that made her more than a discarded wife hiding in beige anonymity. The problem was that Victor's instructions had been clear. Stay in Riverside, keep a low profile, don't ask questions. Getting a job would require leaving the apartment, interacting with people, creating a paper trail. But the instructions had also said she couldn't leave the Riverside area. They hadn't said she couldn't move around within it. Lena spent an afternoon walking the neighborhood, mapping exits and routes, studying the patterns of Victor's watchers. The black sedan followed at a distance. The dog walker appeared on schedule, but they were watching for her to leave, to run. They weren't watching for her to build a life. On her 4th walk, Lena found a small storefront 3 blocks from her apartment. The sign in the window read Riverside Community Foundation in faded letters. Through the glass, she could see rows of filing cabinets, a reception desk with an ancient computer, and a middle-aged woman sorting through stacks of papers with the air of someone fighting a losing battle. Lena had researched the foundation that morning. On paper, it was a nonprofit providing services to low-income families, food assistance, job training, emergency housing. In reality, based on the funding sources she'd traced through public records, it was almost certainly a front for money laundering. The donations came from businesses with known syndicate connections. The expenses were vague and poorly documented. The whole operation had the fingerprints of organized crime all over it, which made it exactly the kind of place where someone like Lena might go unnoticed. She pushed through the door, triggering a bell that sounded like it had been installed in 1987. The woman at the desk looked up, pushing reading glasses up into graying hair. Can I help you? I'm looking for work, Lena said, keeping her voice level. I saw your sign. What sign? The one that says you're a community foundation. I assume community foundations need volunteers. The woman's expression shifted from distracted to suspicious. We're not really set up for volunteers right now. Funding issues. I don't need money. Lena stepped closer to the desk, careful to keep her body language open and non-threatening. I need something to do. I'm good with organization, filing, data entry, whatever you need. Why? It was the right question. People didn't volunteer at failing nonprofits in forgotten neighborhoods without a reason. I'm new to the area, Lena said, sticking as close to the truth as possible. I don't know anyone. I figured helping out might be a good way to meet people. Stay busy. The woman studied her for a long moment, taking in Lena's carefully neutral clothes, jeans, plain sweater, nothing expensive, and the practiced ease with which she held herself. Whatever she saw seemed to satisfy her, because she sighed and gestured to the chaos surrounding them. I'm Margaret. I run this place, such as it is. We're drowning in paperwork, and nobody knows where anything is. If you can organize files and use a computer, you'd actually be helping. When can I start? You're very eager for someone offering to work for free. Lena met Margaret's eyes steadily. I'm very bored. Margaret laughed, sharp and surprised. Fair enough. Come back tomorrow at 9. We'll see how long you last. Lena returned the next morning and found Margaret buried under an avalanche of grant applications, donation receipts, and expense reports that looked like they'd been generated by someone with a fundamental misunderstanding of mathematics. The previous office manager quit 6 months ago, Margaret explained, shoving a stack of folders toward Lena. She said the job was making her drink. These need to be sorted by date and filed. Think you can handle that? Absolutely. Lena spent the first day creating order from chaos. The filing system was nonsensical, the records were incomplete, and someone had apparently decided that shoving papers into random drawers constituted organization. By 5 o'clock, she'd established a basic structure and identified at least a dozen major discrepancies in the foundation's financial records. She didn't mention the discrepancies to Margaret. Not yet. On her second day, a man came to the office. He was in his 60s, well-dressed in a way that didn't match the neighborhood, and he carried himself with the quiet authority of someone used to being obeyed. Margaret, he said, not bothering with pleasantries. We need to talk about the Henderson Street property. Margaret glanced at Lena, then back to the man. Mr. Chen, this isn't a good time. It's never a good time. Mr. Chen's gaze flickered to Lena for the first time, assessing. Who's this? New volunteer, Lena. This is Mr. Chen. He's on our board. Volunteer. Mr. Chen's tone suggested he found the concept amusing. How civic-minded. Margaret, my office. Now. They disappeared into the back room. Lena continued filing, but she kept her ears open. The walls were thin and voices carried. Falling apart, Mr. Chen was saying. The numbers don't add up, the expenses are sloppy, and the auditors are asking questions. Doing the best I can with what we have. Not good enough. If this operation gets exposed, the rest was too muffled to make out, but Lena had heard enough. The foundation was in trouble. The money laundering operation was drawing attention. Someone higher up the chain was nervous, which meant opportunity. Over the next 2 weeks, Lena made herself indispensable. She reorganized the entire filing system, set up a new database for tracking donations and expenses, and quietly began cleaning up the financial records. She didn't fix the discrepancies. That would have raised questions, but she made them less obvious, buried them in legitimate expenses, smoothed out the rough edges that might catch an auditor's eye. Margaret noticed. You're good at this, she said one afternoon, watching Lena work through a particularly complicated set of books. Really good. Where'd you learn accounting? Community college, Lena lied smoothly. I was working toward a degree before life got complicated. Life has a way of doing that. Margaret hesitated, then added, Mr. Chen was impressed with the new filing system. He asked about you. Lena kept her expression neutral. What did you tell him? That you're a volunteer who needed something to do. He said he might have a paid position for someone with your skills. Would you be interested? Every instinct Lena had screamed caution. Getting deeper into a syndicate operation was dangerous, possibly suicidal. Victor's people were still watching her apartment. If they reported back that she was working for another organization with criminal connections, but sitting in her beige prison waiting for 2 years to pass wasn't survival. It was slow death. "I'd be interested," Lena said. 3 days later, Mr. Chen summoned her to his office. It wasn't at the foundation. The address he provided was in the business district, a sleek high-rise that housed legitimate consulting firms and law offices. Chen Enterprises occupied the 15th floor, all glass and chrome and carefully curated art. Mr. Chen's personal office looked out over the city. He sat behind a desk that probably cost more than Lena's yearly allowance and gestured for her to take a seat across from him. "Margaret speaks highly of you," he said without preamble. "Says you turned their disaster of a filing system into something functional in less than 2 weeks. It wasn't that difficult, just time-consuming." Don't be modest. I've seen the before and after. What you did requires skill and attention to detail. He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Margaret also says you don't ask questions. That's a valuable trait." Lena said nothing. Silence, she'd learned, was often the smartest response. "I have several businesses," Mr. Chen continued, "some more visible than others. They all require careful management, discreet record-keeping, and people who understand that certain details are best kept private. I'm looking for someone to help restructure my operations, improve efficiency, and make sure everything appears appropriate. You want me to make your businesses look legitimate." Mr. Chen smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "I want you to ensure my businesses operate smoothly and in compliance with all relevant regulations. What you choose to infer beyond that is your own business." Lena considered the offer. Mr. Chen was clearly connected to the same criminal networks that Victor controlled, but he operated in different territory, different specialties. Taking a job with him wasn't technically violating Victor's orders. She wasn't contacting Victor or his direct associates, and she wasn't leaving Riverside. But it was walking a very thin line. "What's the pay?" she asked. $75,000 a year to start. More if you prove yourself valuable. More than Victor was giving her. Enough to matter. "When do I start?" "Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Margaret will give you the details." Mr. Chen stood, signaling the end of the meeting. "One more thing, Lena. The people I work with value loyalty and discretion above everything else. Betrayal has consequences. Understand?" "I understand." "Good. I think we'll work well together." Lena started her new position the next morning. The work was exactly what she'd expected, taking messy financial records from various businesses and making them look clean, legitimate, defensible under scrutiny. Import companies that dealt in more than the declared goods, restaurants that reported half their actual revenue, construction firms that employed workers who didn't exist on paper and paid them with cash that came from nowhere official. It was all illegal, all dangerous. And Lena was brilliant at it. She'd spent years watching her mother navigate the edges of poverty, stretching every dollar, finding loopholes in assistance programs, making their meager resources go further through sheer force of will and creative accounting. She'd learned to see patterns, to understand systems, to find the spaces between rules where survival lived. Now she applied those skills to Mr. Chen's empire and watched his operations become smoother, cleaner, harder to catch. Mr. Chen noticed. Within a month, he'd given her access to more sensitive operations. Within 2, he was asking her opinion on expansion strategies. "You have a gift for this," he told her one afternoon, reviewing her proposal for restructuring his waterfront holdings. "Most people in this business think in terms of force and intimidation. You think in terms of structure and sustainability. It's refreshing." "Force and intimidation have their place," Lena said carefully, "but they're expensive, inefficient, drawing attention." "Exactly." Mr. Chen set down the proposal and looked at her directly. "Where did you come from, Lena? You show up in Riverside out of nowhere, no background I can verify, no connections anyone can trace, and within 2 months you're restructuring my entire operation. Who are you?" Lena had prepared for this question. "I'm someone who needed to disappear and start over. The details don't matter. What matters is that I'm good at what I do, and I don't have any loyalties that would conflict with working for you." It wasn't quite a lie. She didn't have loyalties anymore. Victor had made sure of that. Mr. Chen studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Fair enough. Everyone has a past. As long as yours doesn't become my problem, we're fine. It won't. But even as Lena said it, she knew it was a promise she might not be able to keep. 3 months after her wedding night, Lena sat in her apartment. Still beige, still soulless, but somehow less oppressive now that it wasn't her entire world, and reviewed the day's work on her laptop. She'd restructured 3 more of Mr. Chen's operations, identified inefficiencies that were costing him hundreds of thousands annually, and proposed solutions that would increase profit margins while reducing legal exposure. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You've been busy. Lena's blood went cold. She stared at the message, trying to decide if responding was smart or suicidal. Before she could decide, another message appeared. Don't worry, I'm not one of Victor's people, but I am interested in what you're doing. We should talk. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., Riverside Park. Come alone. Lena's first instinct was to delete the messages and pretend they'd never arrived. Her second was to tell Mr. Chen he had a security leak. Her third, the one that won, was to show up at the meeting and find out who was watching her closely enough to know what she'd been doing. She arrived at Riverside Park 15 minutes early, scoping out exits and sightlines. The park was small, unremarkable, mostly empty on a Tuesday afternoon. A few mothers with strollers, an elderly man feeding pigeons, no one who looked like syndicate muscle. At exactly 2 p.m., a man sat down on the bench beside her. He was younger than she'd expected, mid-30s maybe, with dark hair and the kind of calm, controlled presence that suggested he was very good at violence, but rarely needed to use it. He wore an expensive suit like it was casual clothing and carried no visible weapons, which probably meant they were very well concealed. Lena Hart, he said, not looking at her. Or should I say, Lena Calder. Though I suppose that name didn't last long. Lena's jaw tightened. Who are you? Gideon Cross? I work for people who are very interested in Mr. Chen's recent improvements in operational efficiency. He finally turned to look at her, dark eyes assessing. They're also interested in how a woman who married Victor Calder 3 months ago ended up restructuring a rival organization's infrastructure. I'm divorced from Victor. Whatever he does isn't my concern. Is that what you tell yourself? Gideon's tone was mild, almost sympathetic. Here's what I know. Victor Calder married you for reasons that had nothing to do with affection, divorced you the same night for reasons that had everything to do with power, and tucked you away in Riverside where you were supposed to fade into obscurity. Instead, you walked into a syndicate front organization and started making yourself valuable. That takes either courage or desperation. I'm curious which. Both, Lena said flatly. What do you want? To offer you something better than what Mr. Chen can give you. I'm not interested in switching employers. I'm not offering you a job. I'm offering you a choice. Gideon leaned back on the bench, utterly relaxed despite discussing criminal enterprises in a public park. The people I represent control interests that make Mr. Chen look like a corner store operation. They're always looking for talent, especially talent with strategic thinking and no obvious loyalties. You've proven you have both. And if I'm not interested in being recruited, then you continue working for Mr. Chen, making him more efficient, until eventually Victor or the Volkovs notice that you're helping a rival organization and decide you're a liability worth removing. Your anonymity has maybe another 2 months before someone runs your picture through the right database. Lena's stomach dropped. You're bluffing. I'm being honest. Victor thinks he put you in a cage and forgot about you, but you're showing up in financial records, reorganizing operations, leaving footprints. Someone will notice. The question is whether you want to be prepared when they do. What makes you think your people can protect me better than Mr. Chen? Because my people don't just react to threats. We eliminate them before they materialize. Gideon pulled a card from his jacket and placed it on the bench between them. Think about it. When you're ready to discuss options, call that number. He stood and walked away, leaving Lena alone on the bench with a business card that had nothing on it but a phone number. She sat there for 20 minutes after he left, watching the mothers with their strollers and the old man with his pigeons, thinking about choices and cages and the difference between surviving and actually living. Then she picked up the card and put it in her pocket, That night, Lena stood at her apartment window and watched Victor's surveillance team change shifts. The black sedan pulled away right on schedule. The replacement arrived 3 minutes later. Predictable. Routine. Victor thought he'd contained her, controlled the variables, ensured she wouldn't become a problem. He had no idea that the problem had already begun. Lena pulled out her phone and looked at Gideon's card, at the number that represented another dangerous choice in a life that had become nothing but dangerous choices. She thought about her mother, who'd spent her last years trapped by circumstances she couldn't control, worn down by systems designed to keep people like her from ever climbing out. She thought about the promise she'd made at her mother's funeral, that she wouldn't end the same way, small and scared and defeated. She thought about Victor standing at that penthouse window, dismissing her with casual cruelty, reducing her entire existence to a transaction he'd found no longer profitable. And she thought about the woman she'd seen in the mirror that wedding night, lost and terrified and utterly powerless. That woman was gone. Lena dialed the number. Gideon answered on the second ring. That was faster than I expected. When can we talk? Lena asked. Tomorrow, same place. But this time, we'll discuss what you're really worth. The call ended. Lena set down the phone and turned back to the window. Watching the city spread out before her like a game board, she was just beginning to understand how to play. Victor had taught her an important lesson, even if he didn't know it. In this world, people were only as valuable as their usefulness. She just needed to make sure she became useful to someone who wouldn't throw her away when a better option came along. Or better yet, become so valuable that throwing her away would cost more than keeping her. The surveillance car sat in the parking lot, watching an empty apartment, reporting back that everything was normal. The discarded wife was staying where she belonged. They had no idea that normal had ended the moment Lena decided she was done being discarded. Gideon Cross didn't meet her at the park the next day. Instead, he sent a car, sleek, black, completely unremarkable, except for the driver who moved with military precision and didn't ask questions when Lena climbed into the back seat. They drove for 40 minutes, leaving Riverside behind and heading into the city proper. Lena watched Victor's surveillance team scramble to follow, saw them lose the tail in downtown traffic, and felt a small surge of satisfaction at their confusion. By the time the car pulled into an underground garage beneath a glass tower in the financial district, she'd counted at least 3 different counter-surveillance maneuvers. Whoever Gideon worked for took security seriously. The elevator required a keycard and biometric scan. It rose smoothly to the 42nd floor and opened directly into an office that made Mr. Chen's setup look like amateur hour. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the entire city. The furniture was modern, expensive, chosen by someone who understood that power didn't need to announce itself. Everything in the space whispered control. Gideon stood at the window, hands in his pockets, watching the city like he owned it. He turned when Lena stepped out of the elevator. "Welcome," he said. "Can I offer you something? Coffee? Water?" "Answers," Lena replied, starting with who you actually work for. Gideon's mouth curved in what might have been approval. "Direct. I appreciate that. Please, sit." Lena took one of the chairs facing the window, positioning herself so she could see both Gideon and the door. Old habits from dangerous times. "The organization I represent doesn't have a name you'd recognize," Gideon began, settling into the chair across from her. "We prefer it that way. What you need to know is that we coordinate interests across multiple territories, multiple specialties. Think of us as the structure that keeps smaller operations from destroying each other." "You're the council," Lena said quietly. "The ones who mediate disputes, set territory boundaries, maintain order." Gideon's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "You've done your research." "I pay attention. Mr. Chen answers to someone. Victor answers to someone. All the families and organizations answer to someone, or the city would be a war zone." But Lena leaned back in her chair, projecting calm she didn't quite feel. "You're the someone." "We're part of the someone, yes. And we've been watching you since you walked into Margaret's office 3 months ago. You're either remarkably brave or remarkably foolish, and we needed to determine which." "What conclusion did you reach?" "That you're neither. You're desperate, which makes you dangerous in interesting ways." Gideon crossed one leg over the other, completely at ease. "Victor Calder married you, discarded you, and thought he'd neutralized any risk you represented. Instead, you landed in the middle of a syndicate operation and started making improvements that caught our attention. That suggests either suicide by stupidity or calculated risk. Given the precision of your work at the Foundation, I'm betting on the latter. Lena said nothing. Let him talk. Let him reveal what he wanted before she committed to anything. Mr. Chen's operations have been problematic for years, Gideon continued. Sloppy accounting, inefficient structure, constant exposure risk. We've considered replacing him, but he has connections, history, loyalty from people who matter. Then you show up and start fixing everything he's been too stubborn or incompetent to address himself. So you want me to keep working for Chen, make him useful to you? No. We want you to work for us directly. Chen is a single operation. We oversee dozens. What you did for him in 3 months, we need you to do across the entire network. Lena's heart rate kicked up, but she kept her voice steady. That's a significant promotion from filing paperwork in Riverside. You're capable of significantly more than filing paperwork. We both know that. Gideon pulled out a tablet and slid it across the glass table between them. These are some of our current operations. Take a look. Lena picked up the tablet and began scrolling through the files. Import businesses, shipping companies, real estate holdings, investment firms. Each one had financial records attached, and each one was a mess. Overcomplicated structures designed to hide illegal activity, but so poorly executed that they practically highlighted the crimes instead of concealing them. This is amateur work, she said after several minutes of review. Exactly. Most of these operations are run by people who understand violence and intimidation, but have no concept of sustainable business practices. They make money, but they're inefficient, exposed, constantly vulnerable to law enforcement or rival takeovers. You want me to clean this up, make it sustainable. We want you to rebuild it from the foundation, strip away the rot, establish proper structures, create systems that can survive scrutiny and expansion. Gideon leaned forward slightly. In short, we want you to do what you were clearly trained to do before your life fell apart. Lena looked up sharply. What do you know about my life before Victor? Enough. Columbia University, economics degree, top of your class, job offers from 3 investment banks and a consulting firm. Then your mother got sick, medical bills destroyed your finances, you dropped out to take care of her, and when she died, you were left with debt and no way to pay it. Victor's people found you working 2 jobs and barely surviving, saw someone intelligent and desperate, and made you an offer. Gideon's expression softened fractionally. You thought marriage would save you. Instead, it taught you that salvation isn't real, only leverage. The casual recitation of her history, facts she'd never told anyone, details that should have been buried, made Lena's skin crawl. You've been investigating me. We investigate everyone we consider recruiting. Your background is actually one of your strongest assets. You understand legitimate business structures, you have formal training, and you've survived circumstances that would have broken most people. That combination is valuable. And what makes you think I won't take your offer and immediately sell your information to the highest bidder? Gideon smiled. Because you're smarter than that. Betraying us would make you rich for approximately 48 hours before you disappeared. And because I think you understand something important. Right now, you're surviving. Working for us, you could actually build something. Power, security, a life that isn't defined by what Victor Calder decided to throw away. The words landed harder than Lena wanted to admit. 3 months of exile, of carefully rebuilding herself in the shadows, and she was still just surviving. Still just making it through each day without attracting the wrong attention. What exactly are you offering? She asked. Position as strategic operations consultant. You'd work directly with me, reporting to the council. Your job would be to assess operations, identify inefficiencies and vulnerabilities, propose restructuring plans, and oversee implementation. Starting salary is $200,000 annually, plus performance bonuses. We'd relocate you to a secure location of your choosing within the city, provide security, and ensure Victor and his associates understand that interfering with you would have consequences. $200,000, more money than Lena had ever imagined earning, more than her mother had made in 5 years of working herself to death. There's a catch, she said. There's always a catch. The catch is that once you're in, you're in. We don't offer retirement packages or exit strategies. You become part of the structure, and the structure protects itself. You'd have access to information that could destroy powerful people, which means those people need to trust that you won't use it against them. You're asking me to commit to a life of crime with no way out. I'm offering you a life of strategy and structure with the backing of people who can actually protect you. What you choose to call it is your business. Gideon stood and walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. I know you're afraid. You should be. This isn't a small decision. But ask yourself what your alternative is. Stay with Chen until someone notices you? Go back to hiding in Riverside? Try to disappear again and hope Victor doesn't decide you're too much of a risk to leave alive? Lena stared at the tablet, at the disaster of financial records that represented millions of dollars moving through illegal channels. She thought about the skills she'd buried when her mother got sick, the future she'd abandoned because survival took precedence over ambition. She thought about standing in that penthouse suite while Victor explained that she'd never been anything more than useful. I want to see the contract, she said. Full terms, not just the salary offer. Done. I'll have it sent to you by end of business today. And I want to meet with the council before I sign anything. If I'm committing my life to an organization, I need to know who's actually in charge. Gideon turned back from the window, and for the first time, Lena saw genuine surprise on his face. That's not a standard request. Then consider it my first test of whether you actually value what I bring to the table. You said I have strategic thinking and formal training. Part of that training was never signing contracts with people I haven't vetted. For a long moment, Gideon said nothing. Then he laughed, sharp and surprised. You have titanium nerves, I like that. Fine, I'll arrange a council meeting. But understand that these are people who don't typically take meetings with potential consultants. If you waste their time or ask the wrong questions, the offer disappears. Understood. Good. We'll be in touch. Gideon walked to the elevator and pressed the call button. The car will take you back to Riverside. In the meantime, I suggest you start thinking about how you'd restructure the operations you reviewed. The council will want to see your approach. Lena stood, carrying the tablet. How long do I have? 72 hours. After that, we move on to other candidates. The elevator arrived. Lena stepped inside, and as the doors began to close, Gideon called out one last thing. Lena? Victor made a mistake when he threw you away. Don't prove him right by being too afraid to become what you're capable of. The doors shut on his words, and Lena descended 42 floors with her heart pounding and her mind already racing through possibilities. She spent the next 3 days living in the tablet Gideon had given her. The files contained detailed financial records for 11 different operations spanning shipping, real estate, entertainment venues, and import businesses. Each one was a structural nightmare. Money moving through too many hands, records that didn't match deposits, expenses that couldn't be explained, and vulnerabilities so obvious that Lena couldn't believe law enforcement hadn't already shut them down. She worked 16-hour days, building comprehensive restructuring plans for each operation. She identified redundancies, proposed consolidations, created legitimate business frameworks that could absorb illegal profits without raising red flags. She built organizational charts showing proper reporting structures, designed accounting systems that would pass external audits, and calculated projected efficiency gains and risk reductions. By the time 72 hours had passed, Lena had produced a presentation that would have impressed her Columbia professors, and a strategy that could save the council millions while reducing their exposure to prosecution by more than 60%. She also hadn't slept more than 4 hours total and was running on coffee and adrenaline. Gideon's message came exactly on schedule. Council meeting. Tomorrow, 8 p.m. Dress professionally. Bring your analysis. Don't be late. The address was in the old industrial district, a part of the city that had been warehouses and factories before gentrification started creeping in. Lena arrived 15 minutes early, wearing a charcoal suit she'd owned since her Columbia days, and carried herself like she belonged. The building looked abandoned from the outside. Broken windows, faded signage, weeds growing through cracks in the pavement. Inside, it had been transformed into something else entirely. Polished floors, exposed brick, lighting that probably cost more than most people's cars. The space had the feel of a private club, exclusive and deliberately hidden. Gideon met her at the door. You came prepared. Lena held up the leather portfolio containing her presentation. You said not to waste their time. Come on, they're waiting. He led her through a series of corridors to a conference room at the center of the building. The space was windowless, soundproofed, designed for conversations that couldn't be overheard. A long table dominated the room, and seated around it were 6 people who looked like they could have been discussing corporate mergers instead of criminal enterprises. 3 men, 3 women, ages ranging from 40s to 70s. Each one watched Lena enter with the focused attention of predators evaluating potential prey. "Counsel," Gideon said. "This is Lena Hart. Lena, the counsel." No names, no introductions beyond that. The message was clear. These people's identities were need to know, and she didn't need to know yet. "Ms. Hart," the woman at the head of the table spoke with the crisp authority of someone used to making final decisions. She was perhaps 60, silver hair swept back, wearing a suit that screamed executive power. "Mr. Cross tells us you have thoughts on improving our operational efficiency." "I have more than thoughts," Lena said, moving to the presentation screen at the front of the room. "I have a comprehensive restructuring plan that will reduce your legal exposure by 63% while increasing profit margins by an estimated 40% over 2 years. One of the men, younger, maybe late 40s, with the hard eyes of someone who'd seen violence up close, leaned back in his chair. "That's ambitious, also impossible." "It's neither. Your current operations are structured like you're still running street-level enterprises instead of multi-million-dollar businesses. You're using intimidation where you should be using incorporation, force where you should be using front companies, and violence where you should be using contracts." Lena opened her first slide, showing a comparison of current versus proposed organizational structures. "You're leaving money on the table and creating unnecessary risk because the people running these operations don't understand sustainable business practices." The room went very quiet. Criticizing the council's operations this directly was either brilliant or suicidal. The silver-haired woman's lips curved slightly. "Continue." Lena spent the next 40 minutes walking them through her analysis. She broke down each operation, showed exactly where the inefficiencies were, and demonstrated how proper restructuring could achieve the results she'd promised. She used their own financial data to prove her points, highlighted the specific risks they were currently exposed to, and presented solutions that were practical, implementable, and immediately actionable. By the time she finished, the council members were leaning forward, engaged in ways that suggested they were seeing their operations with new eyes. "Questions?" Lena asked. The hard-eyed man spoke first. "You're suggesting we essentially legitimize our operations, make them look and function like real businesses. They are real businesses. They're just poorly run ones. The criminal elements need to be buried so deep in legitimate activity that finding them requires resources and time law enforcement won't commit unless they have specific cause. Right now, your operations are practically advertising themselves. And you can implement these changes across all our territories." This from an older man with the careful speech of someone who'd survived by being precise. "I can provide the frameworks and oversight. Implementation requires cooperation from the people currently running these operations, which means you need to make it clear that cooperation isn't optional." "That won't be a problem," the silver-haired woman said. "What else do you need?" "Access to complete financial records, authority to audit any operation at any time, and protection from retaliation by people who won't like being restructured." Lena met the woman's eyes directly. "I'm also going to encounter resistance from operators who think they know better. I need to know that when I make changes, you'll back them." "You're asking for significant authority for someone we just met." I'm asking for the authority necessary to do the job you're hiring me for. If you want me to fix your operations, I need the power to actually fix them. Otherwise, I'm just an expensive consultant who writes reports nobody implements." The council members exchanged glances, having a conversation in looks and micro-expressions that Lena couldn't fully read. Finally, the silver-haired woman nodded. "You'll have what you need. But understand this, Ms. Hart. The authority we give you comes with expectations. Succeed, and you'll have more power and resources than you've probably imagined. Fail, and you become a liability we can't afford to keep." "I understand." "Do you? Because in your previous life, failure meant losing a job or a grade. Here, failure means disappearing. We need to know you can handle that pressure." Lena thought about the night Victor had handed her divorce papers, about 3 months of rebuilding herself from nothing, about every moment since her mother died when failure would have meant death or worse. "I've been handling pressure my entire life," she said quietly. "The difference now is that I'm not doing it alone and hoping to survive. I'm doing it with backing and resources, which means I can actually succeed." The silver-haired woman smiled. It was sharp, approving, dangerous. "Mr. Cross, prepare the contracts. Miss Hart, welcome to the organization. Your first assignment is the waterfront shipping operation. It's our biggest exposure risk and our most profitable venture. If you can fix that, you can fix anything." The meeting ended. The council members filed out one by one, some nodding to Lena, others ignoring her entirely. When the room was empty except for her and Gideon, Lena let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "That went well," Gideon said. "They threatened to kill me if I fail. They threatened to kill everyone. It's standard practice. The fact that they're giving you the waterfront operation as a first assignment means they're taking you seriously." He gestured toward the door. "Come on, we have a lot of work to do." Over the next 6 weeks, Lena dismantled and rebuilt the waterfront shipping operation from the ground up. She fired corrupt supervisors, restructured the accounting systems, implemented proper inventory controls, and created legitimate business entities to absorb the illegal profits. She worked 18-hour days, fielded death threats from people who resented her authority, and learned to recognize the difference between legitimate resistance and deliberate sabotage. Gideon was with her through all of it, providing backup, running interference with the council, and occasionally reminding people that Lena had authority they needed to respect. He was calm, precise, and utterly ruthless when necessary. Watching him work taught Lena more about power dynamics than her entire Columbia education. "You're a natural at this," he told her one night as they reviewed progress reports in the office that had become her second home. "Most people in your position would have tried to win people over, make friends, build alliances. You just came in and started breaking things that needed to be broken." "Friendship and popularity don't fix systemic problems," Lena said, highlighting another inefficiency in the current shipping schedule. "Clear authority and consistent consequences do." "That's a very cold perspective." "I learned from the best. Victor taught me that people respect power, not kindness." She looked up from her screen. "I'm just applying the lesson." Gideon's expression shifted, something almost like concern crossing his face. "Victor also threw you away when you stopped being useful. Don't become him in the process of proving him wrong." The words hit harder than they should have. Lena looked back at her screen, not wanting to examine the implications. She was halfway through restructuring the waterfront operation when Victor finally noticed her. The message came through Dmitri, Victor's head of security, who showed up at her new apartment, a sleek loft in the downtown district with actual security and a view that didn't make her want to scream, looking uncomfortable. "Mr. Calder wants to see you," he said without preamble. Lena was working from home, spreadsheets covering her coffee table, 3 different phones monitoring operations across the city. She looked up at Dmitri and felt nothing but cold calculation. "Tell Mr. Calder, I'm busy." Dmitri's eyebrows rose. "Ma'am, that's not really an option." "It is now. I don't work for Victor. I don't answer to Victor. And I definitely don't drop everything because Victor decides he wants a conversation 6 months after throwing me away." Lena returned her attention to her spreadsheets. "You can see yourself out." "Lena!" Dmitri's voice held a warning. "You're making a mistake." "No, Dmitri. Victor made a mistake. I'm just living my life. Tell him if he wants to talk to me, he can make an appointment like everyone else." Dmitri left, and Lena waited for the inevitable retaliation. But nothing came. No threats, no pressure, no attempts to force the meeting Victor wanted. Instead, 3 days later, Victor showed up at her apartment himself. Lena was reviewing financial projections when her security system alerted her to someone at the door. The camera showed Victor, alone, wearing a suit that probably cost more than her monthly salary and looking uncomfortable in ways she'd never seen before. She considered not answering, considered making him wait, making him understand what it felt like to be dismissed and ignored. But curiosity won. She opened the door. Victor looked older than she remembered, tired around the eyes, tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there 6 months ago. He took in her apartment with a single sweeping glance. The upscale location, the expensive furnishings, the evidence of success scattered across every surface. You've done well for yourself, he said. What do you want, Victor? To talk. Can I come in? Lena stepped aside, letting him enter but not offering any of the courtesy she would have shown 6 months ago. Victor walked to the windows, staring out at the city the same way he had in that penthouse suite. I heard you're working for the council now, he said after a long silence. You heard correctly. That's dangerous, Lena. They're not forgiving when people disappoint them. Neither are you, apparently. She crossed her arms, maintaining distance. You didn't come here to warn me about danger. What do you really want? Victor turned from the window, and there was something in his expression that might have been regret. I made a mistake. With us. With how I handled things. The words should have meant something. 6 months ago, they would have meant everything. Now they just sounded empty. You made several mistakes, Lena said. Marrying me was one, divorcing me was another, but the biggest mistake was thinking I'd stay disappeared just because you decided I should. I was trying to protect you. You were trying to protect yourself. I was leverage you couldn't afford to have used against you, so you removed me from the board. Don't rewrite history to make yourself feel better about it. Victor flinched, actually flinched. Fair enough. But Lena, working for the council puts you in the middle of conflicts you don't understand. The Volkovs, the families, the territory disputes. It's more dangerous than you know. I understand perfectly well. I've been studying the structure for 6 months. I probably know more about how the city's criminal networks operate than you do at this point. Lena moved closer, letting him see the steel in her eyes. I'm not the scared woman you threw away, Victor. I'm not going to break because things get dangerous. Dangerous is where I thrive now. Then you've become exactly what this world makes people. Hard, cold, ruthless. I've become effective. There's a difference. Lena held his gaze. You want to know what I learned from you? That caring about people, trusting them, believing their promises, all of that just makes you vulnerable. Power is the only thing that matters. Control is the only thing that keeps you safe. You taught me that on our wedding night. I never wanted you to become this. You didn't want me to become anything. You wanted me to disappear. Lena walked to the door and opened it. We're done here. Don't come back unless you have actual business to discuss, and even then, go through proper channels. Victor stared at her for a long moment, and Lena saw the exact instant he realized he'd lost something he'd thought he'd successfully thrown away. Not her affection, he'd never wanted that, but her deference, her willingness to be shaped and controlled, her role as someone he could dismiss when convenient. Goodbye, Lena, he said quietly. Goodbye, Victor. He left and Lena closed the door behind him, leaning against it as her heart hammered in her chest. She'd faced down the man who'd destroyed her, stared into those cold eyes, and felt nothing but certainty that she'd made the right choices. She called Gideon. He answered immediately. Victor just left my apartment, she said. I know, we had someone watching in case he tried anything. He didn't. He just wanted to tell me I'd made a mistake working for the council. Gideon was quiet for a moment. And what did you tell him? That he taught me everything I needed to know about power and control. That I learned my lessons well. Did you mean it? Lena looked around her apartment at the evidence of the life she'd built from ashes and determination. Every word. Good, because tomorrow you meet with the West Side operations manager, and he's been told you have authority to restructure his entire organization. He's not going to like it. You need to be ready to break things that need breaking. I'm ready, Lena said. And she was. Victor had tried to discard her, to make her small and afraid and powerless. Instead, he'd freed her from the last vestiges of the person who believed safety came from being useful to someone else. Now she was useful to herself, and that made her more dangerous than Victor could possibly understand. The West Side operations manager was a man named Marcus Reeves, and he made his feelings about Lena's authority clear the moment she walked into his office. So you're the college girl they sent to tell me how to run my business, he said, not bothering to stand or offer a handshake. He was in his 50s, built like a linebacker gone to seed, with scars on his knuckles that told a story of violence solved with fists instead of strategy. Lena set her briefcase on his desk, uninvited. I'm the strategic consultant the council hired to restructure operations that are hemorrhaging money and creating unnecessary legal exposure. Your operation tops that list. My operation has been profitable for 15 years. Your operation has been profitable despite 15 years of structural inefficiency and sloppy management. If it had been run properly, you'd be making 3 times what you're currently pulling in. Lena opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. These are your financial records for the past 3 years. Would you like me to walk you through the problems, or would you prefer to keep pretending everything's fine? Marcus's face darkened. You've got some nerve walking in here and doing exactly what the council authorized me to do. You can cooperate and keep your position, or you can fight me and explain to the council why you're more valuable than the millions of dollars you're currently wasting. Lena met his glare without flinching. Your choice, Marcus, but make it quickly. I have 4 other operations to review this week. The standoff lasted 10 seconds. Then Marcus grabbed the folder with enough force to tear the cover and started reading. Over the next 4 hours, Lena dismantled Marcus's operation piece by piece, showing him exactly where his inefficiencies were and what they were costing. She demonstrated how his distribution network was duplicating efforts, how his accounting practices were creating audit trails that law enforcement could follow, how his personnel decisions were costing them skilled workers while retaining expensive incompetence. Marcus fought her on every point. He had excuses for every problem, justifications for every inefficiency, reasons why things had to be done his way. But Lena had numbers, data, and evidence that cut through his bluster like a blade. By the end of the meeting, Marcus's resistance had shifted from outright hostility to grudging respect. Fine, he said, throwing down the last report. You've made your point. The operation needs work, but I've been running this territory for 15 years. I know the people, the streets, the players. You come in here with your spreadsheets and your Columbia degree. You think you understand how things work, but you don't know this world like I do. You're right, Lena said, surprising him. I don't know this world the way you do, but I know structure, sustainability, and risk management. You keep the relationships and the street knowledge. I provide the framework that makes those assets worth more. We work together, or we both fail. Which is it going to be? Marcus studied her for a long moment, then extended his hand. Together. But if your fancy restructuring destroys what I've built, we're going to have problems. If my restructuring destroys what you've built, it wasn't worth saving in the first place. Lena shook his hand firmly. I'll have the preliminary plan to you by end of week. We start implementation in 2 weeks. She left Marcus's office feeling the exhaustion of 4 hours of combat disguised as business consultation. But she'd won. Another operation brought into line. Another piece of the council's empire made more efficient and less vulnerable. Gideon was waiting in the car outside. How did it go? He wanted to throw me out a window for the first hour. By hour 4, we had a working agreement. Lena collapsed into the seat, rubbing her temples. Is it always going to be this hard? Until people learn that fighting you is more expensive than cooperating with you, yes. Gideon pulled the car into traffic. But you handled Marcus better than most consultants would have. You didn't try to make him like you. You just made him understand the math. The math doesn't care about feelings. No, but people do. And you're developing a reputation as someone who doesn't. Gideon glanced at her. The council appreciates results, but they also value the ability to build alliances. You might want to consider being slightly less abrasive. Victor was abrasive. It worked for him. Victor was abrasive and feared. You're not feared yet. You're just the woman the council hired to fix things. That's different. Gideon turned onto the highway. I'm not saying compromise your standards. I'm saying learn to make people think cooperation was their idea. Lena considered his words as the city blurred past the window. Gideon was right. She'd been approaching every interaction like a battle to be won rather than a relationship to be managed. It was effective in the short term, but it was also isolating her, making her the enemy instead of the solution. I'll work on it, she said finally. Good, because tomorrow you're meeting with representatives from the Northside families, and if you walk in there with the same energy you brought to Marcus's office, you'll start a war. The Northside families controlled territory that bordered Victor's operations, and their relationship with the council was complicated by decades of shifting alliances and old grudges. The meeting was supposed to be exploratory, discussing potential restructuring of their entertainment venues and protection services. But Lena had studied the financial records, and she knew the real issue. Someone was skimming profits, and the families were blaming each other instead of finding the actual thief. The meeting took place in a restaurant that closed for private events, which meant closed for council business. Lena arrived with Gideon and found herself facing 6 family representatives, all men, all radiating the kind of barely contained violence that came from generations of settling disputes with bloodshed. "Gentlemen," Lena began, taking her seat at the head of the table, "thank you for meeting with me. I've reviewed your operations, and I have some concerns I'd like to address." "We know why you're here," said the eldest of the group, a silver-haired man named Vincent Cardelli. "The council thinks we're stealing from them. They sent you to prove it. The council thinks someone is creating discrepancies in the financial reports. Whether that's theft or incompetence is what I'm here to determine." Lena spread several folders across the table. "These are your revenue reports for the past 18 months. Notice anything unusual?" The men examined the documents, and Lena watched their faces shift from defensive to confused. "These numbers are wrong," said another representative, younger, with the wary eyes of someone who'd survived by being paranoid. "My venues pulled in twice this in the third quarter alone." "Exactly. So either you're underreporting to the council, which would be theft, or someone is intercepting revenue before it reaches the official books, which is also theft but perpetrated against you." Lena pulled out another set of documents. "These are the actual deposit records from the banks your operations use. They match your claims, not the council's reports, which means someone between you and the council is skimming profits and making it look like you're responsible." The temperature in the room dropped about 20 degrees. The family representatives exchanged glances that spoke of old suspicions and new fury. "Who?" Vincent's voice was quiet, deadly. "I'm still tracking the money trail, but I have 3 suspects, all middle management, all with access to financial systems, all living beyond their reported means." Lena distributed photos and profiles. "Give me 2 weeks and I'll have proof. Then you can decide how to handle it." "We'll handle it our way," Vincent said, studying the photos with the focus of a man planning violence. "I assumed you would, but I need the evidence first, and I need you to let me continue the investigation without interference. If you start breaking fingers before I finish tracing the money, we'll never know if there are others involved." Vincent looked at her with something approaching respect. "You're asking us to wait while someone steals from us. I'm asking you to be strategic instead of reactive. You want the people responsible? Give me time to find them all. Then you can do whatever you want with the information." Lena closed her folders. "In the meantime, I'm implementing new financial controls across all your operations. They'll make it much harder for anyone to pull this off again." The men talked among themselves in rapid Italian, a conversation Lena couldn't follow but could read in the aggressive gestures and hard voices. Finally, Vincent turned back to her. 2 weeks. You get 2 weeks. After that, we handle things our way." "Understood. You'll have your answers before the deadline?" The meeting ended with handshakes that felt less like agreements and more like temporary truces. As Lena left the restaurant with Gideon, she could feel the weight of those promises pressing against her shoulders. "You just committed to solving a theft investigation in 2 weeks while running 4 other restructuring operations," Gideon said as they reached the car. "I know. That's ambitious even for you." "Then I'd better not fail." Lena climbed into the passenger seat. "Because if I do, the Northside families will assume I'm protecting whoever's stealing from them, and I'll end up as an example of what happens to people who betray their trust." "Exactly. No pressure." Lena spent the next 10 days working 18-hour stretches, dividing her time between tracking the Northside money trail and managing the ongoing restructuring of Marcus's Westside operations. She followed deposits through shell companies, traced payments through legitimate businesses, and slowly built a picture of how the theft was being executed. The answer, when she found it, was both simpler and more damaging than she'd expected. There weren't 3 people skimming profits. There was one, a man named Robert Chen, Mr. Chen's nephew, who had access to financial systems across multiple operations and had been systematically diverting funds for the past 2 years. He'd been clever about it, taking small amounts from different sources, never enough to trigger immediate alerts, but enough to add up to nearly $2 million. The real problem was who was protecting him. Lena discovered the connection late on a Tuesday night, cross-referencing payment records with meeting schedules. Robert Chen had been making regular payments to an offshore account that traced back to a consulting firm that was wholly owned by Irina Volkov. Victor's new fiancée was receiving stolen money from council operations. Lena sat in her apartment staring at the proof, understanding immediately what it meant. This wasn't just theft. This was intelligence gathering. Irina was paying Robert to skim money and provide information about council operations, building a database of vulnerabilities she could exploit later. And Victor, whether he knew it or not, was engaged to someone actively undermining the organization that controlled half the city. The question was what to do about it. Lena could take the information to the council immediately, expose Irina's operation, and watch the Volkovs and Victor's organization go to war. That would eliminate Victor as a rival and prove Lena's value to the council beyond question. But it would also destabilize the entire criminal infrastructure of the city, potentially leading to violence that would draw law enforcement attention and destroy the carefully maintained balance of power. Or she could use the information strategically, approach Victor directly, and give him a choice: cut ties with Irina and the Volkovs, or watch his organization get dismantled when the truth came out. The third option was the most dangerous, but potentially the most effective. Tell the council, but frame it in a way that gave Victor a chance to fix it himself, preserving the alliance between organizations while eliminating the Volkov threat. Lena called Gideon at midnight. "This better be important," he answered, voice rough with sleep. "I found the source of the North Side theft, and it's worse than we thought." She heard movement, Gideon sitting up. "How much worse?" "Bad enough that we need to brief the council before I hand evidence to the North Side families. Can you arrange an emergency meeting?" "That's serious?" "That's serious. I'll have an answer within the hour." The emergency council meeting convened at 3 a.m. in the same industrial building where Lena had first presented her restructuring plans. All 6 council members were present, looking alert despite the hour, which told Lena they were used to crisis management at any time of day. The silver-haired woman, Lena had learned her name was Elizabeth Monroe, though the council members still didn't use names in official meetings, gestured for Lena to begin. "I've identified the source of the financial discrepancies in the North Side operations," Lena said, connecting her laptop to the presentation screen. "Robert Chen, nephew of Chen Enterprises' owner, has been systematically diverting funds from multiple council operations for the past 2 years. Total theft is approximately $1.9 million. "Chen's nephew," Elizabeth's voice was ice. "Chen vouched for him personally. This is a betrayal of trust." "It gets worse. Robert wasn't acting alone." Lena brought up the offshore account records. "He was being paid by a consulting firm owned by Irina Volkov. She was buying information about our operations along with the money." The room went very still. One of the male council members, the hard-eyed one who'd questioned Lena in her first meeting, leaned forward. "Irina Volkov, who is currently engaged to Victor Calder, who controls the East Side territory in partnership with this council." His voice was dangerously quiet. "Are you telling us that Victor's fiancée has been actively working against our interests?" "I'm telling you that Irina Volkov has been gathering intelligence and establishing financial connections that could be used to undermine council operations. Whether Victor knows about it is unclear." Lena brought up another slide showing the pattern of information requests that corresponded with Robert's access to sensitive files. "But the timing suggests this has been ongoing since before their engagement was announced." "Since before Victor divorced you," Gideon said quietly. The implication hung in the air. Victor had claimed he divorced Lena because he loved Irina, because their families were rebuilding an alliance. But if Irina had been positioning herself to gather council intelligence before the divorce, then the entire relationship might have been strategic rather than romantic. Victor might not have thrown Lena away for love. He might have been played by someone smarter and more ruthless than he'd realized. "What do you recommend?" Elizabeth asked Lena directly. "3 options. First, we expose Irina's operation immediately, break the Victor Volkov alliance, and prepare for the fallout. It would demonstrate strength, but destabilize existing agreements. Second, we approach Victor privately, give him proof of what Irina's been doing, and let him handle it. That preserves some stability, but risks Victor choosing Irina over the council. Third, we turn this into an opportunity. We feed false information through the compromised channels, let Irina think she's still gathering intelligence, and use her own operation against her." The council members exchanged glances, that silent communication Lena still couldn't fully read. The third option is risky, said the older man with careful speech. It requires maintaining Robert Chen's access while controlling what he sees. It does. But it also gives us leverage over the Volkovs without triggering open conflict. We can use Irina's intelligence network to feed her whatever we want her to believe. Lena pulled up a strategic diagram showing how information could be controlled and weaponized. The Volkovs make decisions based on bad intelligence, we anticipate their moves, and when the time is right, we expose the whole operation and eliminate their leadership for betraying council trust. That's a long game, Elizabeth said. It requires patience and precision. One mistake, and it falls apart. Yes, but the payoff is eliminating a rival organization without the violence and attention that would come from direct confrontation. The council went silent, considering. Finally, Elizabeth spoke. We'll implement option 3 with modifications. You'll continue tracking the money trail, but you'll work with Gideon to craft the false intelligence we feed through Robert Chen. In the meantime, we need to handle the Northside families. They're expecting answers. I'll give them Robert Chen. He's guilty of theft. They can handle him however they see fit. Lena closed her laptop. But I'll leave out the Volkov connection for now. No reason to complicate things until we're ready to move. Agreed. Mr. Cross, you'll coordinate with Mrs. Hart on the intelligence operation. Everyone else, this information stays in this room. If word gets out before we're ready, whoever leaked it will answer to me personally. Elizabeth stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Ms. Hart, good work. You've identified a threat and provided actionable solutions. That's exactly what we hired you for. The praise should have felt good. Instead, Lena felt the weight of what she'd just set in motion, a long-term manipulation that would require absolute precision and could end with her dead if anything went wrong. She delivered Robert Chen to the Northside families the next day. She didn't ask what they did with him, and they didn't volunteer the information. What mattered was that the theft was solved, the families were satisfied, and Lena had proven her value. But that night, as she sat in her apartment reviewing the intelligence operation she'd designed, Lena's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. Hello? Lena, it's Victor. Her stomach dropped. How did you get this number? I have my sources. We need to talk. In person. Tonight. I told you to go through proper channels if... This isn't council business. This is about Irina. Victor's voice held something Lena had never heard before. Fear. She knows about you, what you're doing, who you're working for, and she's planning something. I don't know what, but she's been asking questions about your operations, your security, your routines. Lena's mind raced. Had Irina somehow discovered that the council knew about her intelligence operation, or was this about something else entirely? When did she start asking questions? 2 days ago, right after Robert Chen disappeared. Victor paused. Lena, I know you're the one who found him. I know you gave him to the Northside families. Irina knows too, and she's angry. So Irina had connected Robert's disappearance to Lena's investigation, which meant she knew someone had discovered the theft, probably suspected the Volkov connection had been uncovered, and was trying to determine what the council knew. Where do you want to meet? Lena asked. Riverside Park, where we first met before all of this. Victor's voice softened slightly. 1 hour. Please, Lena. I think she's going to try to kill you. The line went dead. Lena sat perfectly still for 10 seconds, then called Gideon. Victor just warned me that Irina's planning something. He wants to meet in an hour. It's a trap, Gideon said immediately. Probably. But if Victor's telling the truth, we need to know what Irina's planning. This could accelerate our timeline. Lena stood, already moving toward her closet, where she kept the weapon the council had issued her 3 weeks ago. I'm going to the meeting. Not alone, you're not. I'll have a team in position before you arrive. If this goes wrong, we extract you. And if it doesn't go wrong, then we find out just how much Victor actually knows about his fiancée's operation and whether he's willing to betray her to protect himself. Lena arrived at Riverside Park with 20 minutes to spare, giving Gideon's team time to position themselves in the surrounding area. The park was empty at this hour, just shadows and streetlights and the distant sound of traffic. She chose a bench with clear sight lines, her hand resting near the weapon concealed under her jacket. Victor appeared exactly on time, walking alone, hands visible, moving with the careful precision of someone who knew they were being watched. He sat down beside her, maintaining distance. Thank you for coming, he said quietly. You said Irina's planning to kill me. I'd like details. She's been meeting with someone. I don't know who, but they've been discussing your routines, your security protocols, your vulnerabilities. She thinks you're a threat to her plans. Victor turned to look at Lena directly. She also thinks you're investigating something connected to the Volkovs. Is she right? Lena measured her response carefully. What I'm investigating is council business. Why do you care? Because despite everything that happened between us, I don't want you dead. And because I think Irina has been using me, and I'm trying to figure out if I'm paranoid or if I've been played from the start. There it was. The crack in Victor's armor, the moment of doubt that Lena could exploit. You weren't paranoid, she said quietly. Irina has been gathering intelligence on council operations for at least 2 years. She was using intermediaries to skim money and collect information. When I discovered the operation and shut it down, I became a threat to whatever she's planning. Victor's face went pale in the streetlight. How long have you known? Long enough to brief the council, long enough to start building a case against her entire organization. And you didn't tell me. Why would I? You made it very clear on our wedding night that I wasn't your concern anymore. Lena kept her voice even, factual. But I'll tell you now because you came to warn me, and because I think you're starting to understand what Irina really is. What is she? A strategist who saw an opportunity in your desire for a powerful alliance. She manipulated your emotions, positioned herself as the solution to your political problems, and used your resources and connections to gather intelligence she could leverage later. Lena watched Victor process this, saw the realization settling over his features. She never loved you, Victor. She was playing a longer game than you were. Victor stood abruptly, walking a few steps away, hands clenched into fists. I divorced you for her. I threw away... He stopped, unable to finish. You threw away someone who might have actually been loyal to you for someone who saw you as a useful asset. Yes. Lena stood as well, but didn't move closer. Now the question is what you're going to do about it. What can I do? If I break the engagement, the Volkovs will see it as an insult. If I stay with her, I'm partnered with someone actively working against my interests. Victor turned back to her, and in his eyes, Lena saw something she'd never expected to see from him. Helplessness. I'm trapped. Then get untrapped. You're Victor Calder. You didn't build your organization by accepting situations you didn't like. You changed them. How? Lena considered her options. Victor was valuable. He controlled significant territory, had loyal people, and represented a stabilizing force in the criminal landscape. If the council could bring him fully into alliance against the Volkovs, it would shift the balance of power significantly. But trusting Victor meant believing he'd learned something from his mistakes. It meant giving him a chance to prove he could be more than the man who'd thrown her away. The council is running an operation against Irina, Lena said carefully. We're feeding false intelligence through her compromised channels, setting her up for a fall. When the time comes, we'll expose her entire operation and eliminate the Volkov organization's leadership. If you want out of your engagement without looking weak, that's your opportunity. You discover her betrayal, you bring proof to the council, and you help us take her down. You come out looking strong, loyal, and valuable. And in the meantime? In the meantime, you pretend everything's fine. You keep Irina close, you pay attention to what she's doing, and you report anything relevant to me through Gideon. You become our inside source. Victor stared at her. You want me to spy on my fiancé. I want you to stop being played by her. There's a difference. Lena moved closer, lowering her voice. You taught me that power is the only thing that matters, Victor. Now I'm offering you a chance to use power instead of being used by it. Take it or don't. But decide quickly, because if Irina's planning to move against me, that timeline just got a lot shorter. For a long moment, Victor said nothing. Then he nodded slowly. I'll do it. But Lena, if this goes wrong, if the council decides I'm too much of a risk, then you'll end up like Robert Chen, I know. That's the choice you're making. Lena pulled out a phone, one of the encrypted ones the council used, and handed it to Victor. Use this to contact Gideon. Only Gideon. And Victor, if you betray us on this, I will personally make sure you regret it more than you've regretted anything in your life. Victor took the phone, and something like a smile crossed his face. You've changed. The woman I married would never have threatened me like that. The woman you married doesn't exist anymore. You made sure of that. Lena turned to walk away, then paused. One more thing. What you felt for me on our wedding night, the moment before you decided to divorce me, was any of it real? Victor was quiet for so long that Lena thought he wouldn't answer. Then, so softly she almost missed it, he said, "All of it was real. That's why I had to end it. I couldn't afford to care about anyone that much, not in this world." "Then you were right about one thing," Lena said. "You couldn't afford to care, because caring would have required you to be brave instead of strategic. And you've never been brave, Victor, just careful." She walked away before he could respond, leaving him standing alone in the empty park with a phone that represented either salvation or his destruction. Gideon was waiting at the park exit. "Well?" he asked. "Victor's in. He'll feed us information about Irina's plans." Lena climbed into the car, suddenly exhausted. "He also confirmed she's planning to move against me soon." "Then we accelerate our timeline. The council needs to know." As they drove back into the city, Lena watched the streetlights blur past and thought about the chain of events she'd set in motion. Victor was now working against his own fiancée. Irina was planning an attack without knowing her intelligence network had been compromised. The council was preparing to eliminate an entire criminal organization, and Lena, the woman who'd been thrown away on her wedding night, was at the center of all of it. She'd told Victor she'd changed, but sitting in the car with Gideon, heading toward another emergency council meeting, Lena wondered if changed was the right word. Maybe she'd just finally become what this world had been trying to make her all along. Someone who understood that power wasn't about being loved or protected or useful. Power was about being willing to break things that needed breaking, including yourself, and rebuilding something stronger from the pieces. The question was whether she'd still recognize herself when the rebuilding was done. The emergency council meeting lasted until dawn. Elizabeth Monroe stood at the head of the table, her silver hair catching the first light filtering through the high windows, and made the decision that would reshape the city's criminal landscape. "We move against the Volkovs in 72 hours, she said. "Ms. Hart, you'll coordinate intelligence operations with Mr. Cross and our new asset inside the Calder organization. We need to know exactly what Irina is planning and when she intends to execute it. If she's moving against you, we use that as the trigger point." "Understood," Lena said, her mind already racing through the logistics. "But if Irina's planning to kill me, we need to make sure the attempt actually happens in a controlled environment. Otherwise, we lose the justification for eliminating her leadership." The hard-eyed council member, Thomas, she'd learned his name was Thomas Brennan, leaned forward. "You're suggesting we let her try to kill you?" "I'm suggesting we create an opportunity that's too perfect for her to resist, control every variable, and document the attempt thoroughly enough that when we eliminate the Volkov leadership, everyone understands it was justified retaliation." Lena pulled up a map of the city on the presentation screen. "There's a fundraiser tomorrow night at the Meridian Gallery. Public event, lots of witnesses, enough chaos for Irina to make a move without it looking suspicious. I'll be there as part of my normal operations review. She'll see it as the perfect opportunity." "And when she tries to kill you in a room full of civilians?" Gideon asked quietly. "She won't try it in the gallery itself. Too many variables she can't control. She'll make the attempt during arrival or departure somewhere semi-public but with enough isolation for plausible deniability." Lena traced routes on the map. "If we position our people correctly, we can intercept the attack, document everything, and have proof of Volkov aggression against council interests." Elizabeth studied the map, then looked at Lena with something approaching concern. "You're making yourself bait." "I'm creating an opportunity with acceptable risk. There's a difference." "Is there? Because from where I'm sitting, you're gambling that we can protect you while Irina's people try to kill you. That's not strategy. That's suicide with extra steps." Lena met Elizabeth's gaze steadily. 6 months ago, Victor threw me away because I was a liability he couldn't afford. I've spent every day since then proving I'm more than that. If I back down now because something's dangerous, I'm just confirming his assessment. I'd rather take the risk and show everyone, including myself, that I'm valuable enough to be worth protecting. The room went quiet. Then Elizabeth nodded slowly. "All right, we do it your way. But Ms. Hart, if you die tomorrow night, I'm going to be very disappointed in you. I'll do my best to avoid disappointing you." Lena spent the next 24 hours preparing for what was either going to be her greatest success or her final mistake. She coordinated with Gideon on security positions, worked with Victor to confirm Irina's schedule and likely approach, and reviewed every detail of the gallery layout until she could navigate it blindfolded. Victor's intelligence proved valuable. He reported that Irina had been meeting with a team of contractors, professionals who specialized in making deaths look accidental. She'd been asking about Lena's routines, her security protocols, her vulnerabilities, and she'd shown particular interest in the Meridian Gallery fundraiser, noting that Lena would be attending and likely arriving alone. "She's planning to hit you during arrival," Victor told Gideon over the encrypted phone. "Probably in the parking structure. Multiple shooters, quick extraction, designed to look like a robbery gone wrong." "How many shooters?" Gideon asked. "At least 3. Maybe more. She's not taking chances." Lena, listening on speaker, felt a cold calculation settle over her. 3 shooters meant Irina was serious, committed to eliminating the threat Lena represented. It also meant the attack would be obvious, violent, and impossible to dismiss as anything other than assassination. Perfect. The night of the fundraiser, Lena dressed carefully. Elegant but practical. It was a dress that looked expensive but allowed for movement, heels she could run in if necessary. She checked the weapon concealed under her jacket, made sure her phone was fully charged and set to record, and left her apartment with the calm certainty of someone walking into a carefully planned trap. The drive to the Meridian Gallery took 20 minutes. Lena's driver, one of Gideon's people, maintained constant communication with the security team already in position around the gallery. Gideon himself was monitoring from a vehicle 3 blocks away, coordinating response teams and watching through the network of cameras they'd installed that morning. "Team Alpha in position," came the voice through Lena's earpiece. "Parking structure is clear except for 3 suspects matching the contractor profiles. 2 on level 2, 1 on level 3 near the stairwell." "Copy that," Lena said quietly, proceeding as planned. Her car entered the parking structure at exactly 8:15. The driver took them to level 2, pulling into a spot near the elevator bank where the lighting was good and the sight lines were clear. Lena could see the 2 contractors Victor had warned about, men in dark clothing, positioned behind concrete pillars, trying to look casual and failing. "I have visual on suspects," Lena said, gathering her purse and preparing to exit. "Moving to intercept point." "All teams ready," Gideon confirmed. "We've got you covered." Lena stepped out of the car, and for just a moment, she felt the weight of what she was doing. She was walking toward people who intended to kill her, trusting that the council's security would react fast enough to prevent it. One miscalculation, one moment of hesitation from her protection detail, and this would end very differently than planned. But she'd made her choice. She'd committed to this path when she decided survival wasn't enough anymore. She walked toward the elevator, heels clicking on concrete, purse held loosely in one hand. The contractor shifted position, subtle movements that told her they were preparing to act. 20 feet from the elevator, 15 feet, 10 feet. The first contractor stepped out from behind his pillar, hand moving toward the weapon concealed under his jacket. The second contractor mirrored the movement from the other side. And then everything happened at once. Council security poured out from concealed positions, from behind vehicles, from the stairwell, from the elevator itself. Weapons drawn, voices shouting commands, overwhelming force deployed with practiced precision. The contractors froze, caught between reaching for their guns and recognizing that they were surrounded by professionals who would shoot first and ask questions never. Lena stopped walking, standing perfectly still in the middle of the kill zone that had just been neutralized. "On the ground!" One of the security team leaders was shouting. "Hands where we can see them! Now!" The contractors complied, going to their knees and then flat on the concrete. Within 30 seconds, all 3 were cuffed and being searched. Weapons confiscated, identification documented, phones collected for analysis. Gideon's voice came through Lena's earpiece. "All suspects in custody. You're clear. Well done." Lena let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Did we get everything on camera?" "Every angle. We have documentation of armed suspects lying in wait, coordinated positioning, intent to ambush. More than enough to prove premeditated assassination attempt." Gideon paused. "How are you doing?" "I'm fine. Surprisingly fine, actually." "Good. Because we just triggered the endgame. As soon as we connect these contractors to Irina, she's done." Connecting the contractors to Irina took less than 6 hours. The men weren't professionals enough to maintain silence when faced with council interrogation, and once they understood their options, cooperate and live or protect Irina and die, they provided everything. Phone records, payment receipts, recorded conversations where Irina had specifically identified Lena as the target and outlined the desired approach. By 3 a.m., the council had irrefutable proof that Irina Volkov had ordered the assassination of a council consultant. It was the justification they needed to move against the Volkov organization with the backing of every other family and syndicate in the city. Elizabeth called an emergency summit for dawn, inviting every major player in the criminal infrastructure. The meeting took place in a warehouse that had been transformed into something resembling a corporate boardroom. Long table, professional lighting, security everywhere. Representatives from a dozen organizations filed in, Victor among them, all of them understanding that something significant was about to happen. Irina Volkov arrived last, flanked by her own security, wearing confidence like armor. She took her seat across from the council with the bearing of someone who believed herself untouchable. Elizabeth didn't waste time with pleasantries. "We have a situation," she began, her voice carrying absolute authority. "3 nights ago, we uncovered evidence that someone has been systematically gathering intelligence on council operations, stealing funds, and actively working to undermine our organization. This morning, that same person attempted to assassinate one of our senior consultants." Murmurs rippled through the room, eyes turned to Irina, who maintained perfect composure. "That's a serious accusation," Irina said calmly. "Do you have proof?" "We have extensive proof." Elizabeth nodded to Lena, who stood and connected her laptop to the presentation screen. "Ms. Hart, if you would." Lena brought up the first slide, financial records showing the money trail from Robert Chen to Irina's offshore accounts. Then came the intelligence requests, the pattern of information gathering, the documented evidence of Irina using her access to Victor's organization to compromise council security. "For the past 2 years," Lena said, her voice steady and professional, "Irina Volkov has been running an intelligence operation against this council. She paid intermediaries to skim funds and provide sensitive information about our operations, our vulnerabilities, our internal structures. When I discovered this operation and shut it down, I became a threat to her plans." The next slide showed the contractors, their confiscated weapons, their phones displaying communications with Irina. "Last night, Ms. Volkov hired professionals to kill me in the Meridian Gallery parking structure. We have their weapons, their communications, and their testimony linking the assassination attempt directly to her." Lena pulled up the final slide, a recorded conversation where Irina explicitly ordered Lena's death. "The council doesn't tolerate attacks on its people, and we especially don't tolerate betrayal from organizations we've partnered with in good faith." The room had gone absolutely silent. Every representative was staring at Irina with expressions ranging from shock to barely concealed satisfaction. The Volkovs had enemies, and those enemies were watching their downfall with interest. Irina stood slowly, her composure finally cracking. "This is fabricated. You have no real proof that—" "We have your contractors in custody," Elizabeth interrupted. "We have financial records. We have recorded conversations. We have everything we need to prove you've been working against council interests while pretending to rebuild an alliance." She stood as well, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "The council has made its decision. The Volkov organization is stripped of all territory, all business relationships, and all protections. Your assets will be redistributed among organizations that have proven their loyalty. And you personally are banished from the city. If you or any member of your family is found within city limits after 72 hours, the consequences will be permanent." "You can't do this," Irina said, but her voice had lost its certainty. She was looking around the room, searching for allies and finding none. "Victor, tell them. We're engaged. We're building an alliance." All eyes turned to Victor, who sat perfectly still at the far end of the table. He looked at Irina with an expression Lena couldn't quite read. Anger, certainly, but also something that might have been disappointment. "I didn't know about your operation against the council," he said quietly. "If I had, the engagement would have ended immediately. I don't ally with people who betray the structures that maintain order in this city." "You're choosing them over me?" Irina's voice rose, losing the calculated control she'd maintained for years. "After everything You used me to gather intelligence and position yourself for a power grab that would have destabilized everything we've built here. Yes, I'm choosing the council over you. I'm choosing stability over whatever game you were playing. Victor pulled off the engagement ring Irina had given him and set it on the table. We're done. And you should start counting those 72 hours, because when they expire, I won't protect you from what comes next. Irina stared at him, at the ring on the table, at the council members whose faces showed absolute certainty. Then she looked at Lena, and in her eyes was pure hatred. This is your doing, she said, the discarded wife, crawling back for revenge. This is your doing, Lena corrected. You made the choice to betray the council. You made the choice to order my death. I just documented your choices and let you face the consequences. You'll regret this, all of you. The Volkovs don't forget, and we don't forgive. The Volkovs don't have the power to do anything but leave, Elizabeth said. Security will escort you out. You have 72 hours. Use them wisely. Irina's security moved to flank her, but council guards were already there, making it clear that cooperation was mandatory. As she was led toward the exit, Irina turned back one last time. Victor, she called out, you're making a mistake. I could have made you more powerful than you ever imagined. You would have made me your puppet, Victor replied without looking at her. That's not power. That's slavery with better branding. The doors closed behind Irina, and the warehouse went quiet. Then, slowly, representatives from the other organizations began to stand, approaching the council to express support, to position themselves for the redistribution of Volkov territory, to demonstrate their loyalty. Lena gathered her laptop and stepped back from the presentation screen, feeling the exhaustion of the past 72 hours finally catching up with her. She'd done it. She'd exposed Irina, eliminated a threat to the council, and proven her value beyond question. Gideon appeared at her side. You should feel proud. That was brilliant work. I feel tired. That's fair. But Lena, what you just did, taking down an entire criminal organization with evidence and strategy instead of violence, that's going to change how the council operates. You've shown them there's a better way. Or I've shown them I'm useful for a different kind of violence. Legal, documented, but violence nonetheless. Maybe. But you're alive, and Irina's not. In this world, that counts as winning. Victor approached before Lena could respond. He looked older in the harsh warehouse lighting, tired in ways that went beyond lack of sleep. Thank you, he said quietly, for giving me the chance to make the right choice. You made the choice. I just provided the information. Lena studied his face, searching for the man who'd handed her divorce papers 8 months ago and finding someone different, someone changed by consequences. What will you do now? Rebuild. Focus on my own territory, strengthen my legitimate operations, and try to remember why I got into this business in the first place. Victor hesitated, then added, I meant what I said in the park. What I felt for you was real. I was just too afraid to let it matter. I know. But Victor, the person you felt something for doesn't exist anymore. I'm not the woman you married or the woman you threw away. I'm someone else now. I can see that. You're stronger, harder, more like me than I ever wanted you to be. No, Lena said. I'm like the person I should have been all along. You just helped me figure that out by showing me what happens when you depend on someone else for protection and power. Victor nodded slowly. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. For the wedding night. For the way I handled everything. For not seeing what I had until it was too late. Apology noted. But Victor, we're not going to be friends. We're not going to rebuild anything. We're business associates operating in adjacent territories, that's all. I understand. Victor extended his hand. Business associates, then. Lena shook his hand firmly, then watched him walk away toward the other representatives. She felt nothing watching him go. No lingering affection, no residual anger, nothing but professional assessment of his value to the council's operations. Elizabeth approached as Victor left. Walk with me, Ms. Hart. They left the warehouse and stepped into the early morning light. The city was beginning to wake up, delivery trucks making rounds, early commuters heading to work, the normal rhythms of a place that had no idea what had just been decided in a converted warehouse. You've exceeded every expectation we had when we hired you, Elizabeth said. In 8 months, you've restructured our operations, eliminated a major security threat, and prevented what could have been a devastating war between organizations. The council is unanimously impressed. Thank you. Which is why we're offering you a permanent position as Director of Strategic Operations. You'd have authority over all financial and organizational restructuring across council territories, direct access to council meetings, and resources to build whatever team you need. Elizabeth stopped walking, turning to face Lena directly. It's the kind of position that usually takes decades to reach. We're offering it to you now because you've proven you can handle it. Director of Strategic Operations. Real power, real authority, real security. Everything Lena had been working toward. There's something else, Elizabeth continued. The council has been investigating your background more thoroughly. We found some interesting information about your family history. Lena's stomach tightened. What kind of information? Your mother's maiden name was Castellanos. Your grandmother was Maria Castellanos, who came to this country in the 1960s from Sicily. What your mother probably never told you, what Maria probably never told her, is that the Castellanos family was part of the original syndicate structure that built this city's criminal infrastructure. Your great-grandfather helped establish the territories, the council system, the frameworks we still use today. The information landed like a physical blow. My family was part of this world? Your family helped create this world. Maria left, changed her name, tried to give her daughter a normal life. But the instincts, the strategic thinking, the natural understanding of power structures, that's not something you learned, Lena. That's in your blood. Elizabeth smiled slightly. You're not an outsider who got lucky. You're a legacy who came home. Lena thought about her mother, working herself to death in jobs that barely paid bills, never mentioning any family history beyond vague references to Italy. She thought about her grandmother, who died when Lena was 6, a quiet woman who'd seemed to carry secrets like other people carried purses. They'd been protecting her, trying to give her a chance at a life that didn't involve this world, and she'd ended up here anyway. The council wants you to know that you belong here, Elizabeth said. Not because we hired you, but because this is your inheritance. Your great-grandfather would be proud to see what you've built. What if I don't want it to be my inheritance? What if I just want it to be a job I'm good at? Then it's that too. But Lena, I think you should know where you come from. It might help you understand where you're going. Elizabeth started walking again. Take some time to think about the director position. Let me know your answer within the week. She left Lena standing on the street as the sun rose over the city, illuminating buildings and streets and the lives of people who had no idea that the structures controlling their world had just shifted. Lena walked slowly through the waking city, processing everything that had happened. 8 months ago, she'd been handed divorce papers on her wedding night, reduced to a liability to be managed and discarded. Now she was being offered a position of real power, told she came from a legacy of people who'd built criminal empires, given the chance to shape the future of the organization that controlled the city. The question was whether she wanted it, whether becoming director of strategic operations, embracing her family legacy, committing fully to this world, whether that was the ending she'd been working toward or just another way of being trapped. Her phone buzzed. A text from Gideon. Congratulations on the promotion. Assuming you're taking it. Coffee later to celebrate? Lena stared at the message, then looked up at the city spreading out before her. Somewhere in those buildings were people like her mother had been, struggling, desperate, trapped by circumstances they couldn't control. Somewhere were people like Robert Chen, willing to betray everything for money. Somewhere were people like Victor, powerful, but ultimately controlled by their own fear of losing power. And somewhere, maybe, were people who understood what Lena was beginning to understand, that real power wasn't about control or fear or loyalty, it was about choice, about being able to say yes or no to opportunities and have that decision respected. She texted Gideon back, "Coffee sounds good, but I haven't decided about the promotion yet." His response came immediately. "What's there to decide? You've earned it." Lena typed slowly. Earning it and wanting it are different things. She met Gideon at a cafe 3 blocks from her apartment, a quiet place that served excellent coffee and minded its own business. He was waiting at a corner table when she arrived, 2 cups already ordered. "You look like you haven't slept," he said as she sat down. "I haven't. Been thinking. About the director position." About everything. The position, the family legacy Elizabeth told me about, what I actually want versus what I've been working toward. Lena wrapped her hands around the coffee cup, feeling its warmth. Gideon, do you ever wonder if we're just building prettier cages for ourselves? That's a very philosophical question for 8 in the morning. I'm serious. 8 months ago, I was trapped by Victor's decisions, hidden away in Riverside, dependent on his money and his permission to live my life. Now I'm being offered a promotion that would make me one of the most powerful people in the criminal infrastructure. But I'd still be trapped by responsibilities, by expectations, by the fact that once you're in this world at that level, you can never really leave. Gideon was quiet for a moment, then said, "You're right. The director position would trap you in a different way, more comfortable, more powerful, but still a cage. So why would I take it? Because it's a cage you choose, with authority you control, doing work that matters to you. That's different than being locked up by someone else's decisions." Gideon leaned forward. "Lena, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I will tell you that in the 8 months I've known you, you've been most alive when you're solving problems, rebuilding structures, proving you're capable of more than anyone expected. The director position would let you do that on a scale that could actually change how this world operates. Oh, or it would turn me into another Victor, someone so focused on power and control that I forget what matters. Then don't forget, keep the parts of yourself that made you different from Victor in the first place. The parts that understand empathy, that recognize people aren't just assets, that know the difference between strength and cruelty." Gideon smiled slightly. "You can be powerful without becoming him. That's actually your advantage." Lena thought about that as she sipped her coffee. She thought about the woman Victor had thrown away and the woman she'd become. She thought about her mother and grandmother, trying to protect her from a legacy that had found her anyway. She thought about standing in front of the council, presenting strategies that would reshape criminal operations across the city, and feeling more competent and certain than she'd ever felt doing anything else. "If I take the position," she said slowly, "I want to make some changes to how the council operates." Such as investing more in legitimate businesses, reducing the violence that draws attention, creating sustainable structures that can weather law enforcement scrutiny. I want to make this organization something that doesn't destroy everyone it touches. Lena met Gideon's eyes. "I know that sounds idealistic, but if I'm going to commit to this world, I need to believe I can make it better, not just more efficient." "That's not idealistic. That's strategic. The council would probably support it, especially after you just proved how effective proper structure can be." Gideon pulled out his phone. "Want me to tell Elizabeth you're accepting?" Lena took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision settling over her shoulders. Then she thought about Victor, trying to warn her about Irina because despite everything, he couldn't quite let go of some vestige of caring. She thought about Marcus Reeves, the West Side manager who'd fought her initially, but ended up respecting her approach. She thought about the North Side families, satisfied with her investigation and willing to work with her. She'd built something in the past 8 months, not just a career, but a reputation, relationships, proof that she was capable of navigating this world on her own terms. The question wasn't whether she could do the job. The question was whether she wanted to. And looking at Gideon, at the city visible through the cafe windows, at the future spreading out before her like a game board she was finally learning to play, Lena realized she did want it. Not because it was safe or because someone was offering protection, but because it was hers. Earned, deserved, chosen. "Tell Elizabeth I accept," Lena said, "but I want to meet with the full council next week to discuss my proposals for operational changes. If they want me as director, they get me on my terms." Gideon grinned. "That's the spirit. I'll set it up." He sent the message while Lena finished her coffee, and within minutes, responses started coming back. The council was pleased, the meeting was scheduled, congratulations were offered. Lena felt something she hadn't felt since before her mother got sick, genuine excitement about the future. Not hope exactly, because hope was too fragile for this world, but certainty. The knowledge that she had the skills, the authority, and the determination to shape her own path. "One more thing," Gideon said, putting his phone away. "The apartment the council provided when you started, that was temporary housing for a consultant. As director, you get to choose your own residence. Where would you want to live?" Lena thought about the beige prison in Riverside. about the downtown loft that had been an improvement but never felt like home. She thought about the city spreading out below Victor's penthouse, glittering with possibilities she'd been too scared to reach for. Somewhere high, she said, with windows that show the whole city. I want to see what I'm working with. 3 weeks later, Lena stood in her new apartment on the 45th floor of a building in the heart of the city, watching dawn break over the skyline. The space was hers. Furniture she'd chosen, art she'd selected, books she'd accumulated over months of reading everything she could about business strategy and organizational psychology. No beige walls, no anonymous furnishings, no sense of being hidden away. This was her home. Not a cage, not a safe house, not a place she was allowed to occupy at someone else's discretion. Hers. Her phone rang. She checked the caller ID and smiled before answering. Marcus, it's 6 in the morning. This better be important. Just wanted to be the first to congratulate you officially. Heard the council made the director appointment permanent yesterday. News travels fast. News about power always travels fast. So what's your first move as director, besides making my life harder with more restructuring? Actually, I'm approving your proposal for the community investment program, the one you submitted 3 weeks ago and thought I'd reject. Marcus was quiet for a moment. The Youth Employment Initiative? You're serious? Completely. If we're going to operate in these neighborhoods long term, we need the communities to see us as beneficial, not parasitic. Investing in legitimate youth programs does that while also creating a talent pipeline for our legal operations. It's good strategy. It's also decent, which isn't a word I expected to hear in the same sentence as council operations. Then maybe it's time we updated expectations. Lena turned from the window. Send me the final numbers. I want to present it to the council next month as part of the new community investment framework. She ended the call and returned to the view, watching the city wake up beneath her. Down there were millions of people living their lives, most of them unaware of the structures that controlled significant parts of their world. She couldn't change everything. She couldn't eliminate crime or corruption or the violence that sometimes came with maintaining order in chaos. But she could make things better. She could build systems that were sustainable, less destructive, more strategic. She could use her position to push the council toward operations that created value instead of just extracting it. It wasn't redemption exactly, but it was purpose. The apartment door opened. Gideon came in carrying coffee and pastries from the bakery 6 blocks away that Lena had mentioned liking. Breakfast? He offered. You're spoiling me. You're the director of strategic operations now. Spoiling you is strategically sound. He set the food on the kitchen counter. I also brought the reports you requested on the West Side expansion proposal and the preliminary numbers from the waterfront restructuring. Work on a Sunday morning? You say that like you weren't already planning to spend today reviewing operational data. He wasn't wrong. Lena joined him at the counter, accepting coffee and a chocolate croissant. They'd fallen into this pattern over the past few weeks, working together, talking strategy, building the frameworks that would guide council operations for years to come. It was partnership without ownership, collaboration without coercion. Exactly what Lena had told Victor she wanted the night she'd accepted the council's offer in Gideon's office. I have a question, Gideon said, pulling out his tablet to review the West Side reports. Ask. Do you ever regret it? Choosing this world instead of walking away when you had the chance? Lena thought about the question seriously. She could have disappeared after Victor divorced her, could have taken the settlement money, left the city, started over somewhere anonymous and normal. She could have refused the council's offer, stayed small and safe. No, she said finally. Because walking away would have meant letting Victor's assessment of me be the final word, letting him be right that I was just useful until I wasn't. This world gave me the chance to prove I'm more than that, to myself, if not to anyone else. You proved it, spectacularly. Maybe. But Gideon, I also know what I've become in the process. I'm not the person who believed in safety and protection anymore. I'm someone who understands power, who uses people as strategically as Victor ever did, who can order restructuring that destroys careers without losing sleep. Lena met his eyes. I've become effective. I'm not sure I've become good. Good and effective aren't mutually exclusive. You can be both. Can I? Because every time I make a decision that consolidates power or eliminates a threat or sacrifices someone's interests for the organization's benefit, I sound more like Victor than I want to admit. Gideon set down his tablet, giving her his full attention. You want to know the difference between you and Victor? Victor threw you away when you stopped serving his immediate needs. You're building programs that invest in communities, creating sustainable structures, trying to make this organization something better than it was. That's not the same as being cold or strategic. That's being strategic about building something worth maintaining. Or I'm just rationalizing the choices I've made to feel better about them. Maybe both things are true. Maybe you're strategic and also trying to build something meaningful. Maybe you've learned from Victor's mistakes without becoming him. Gideon smiled. Give yourself some credit, Lena. You've earned it. Later that afternoon, after Gideon left and Lena had spent several hours reviewing operational reports, she found herself thinking about Victor, about the man who'd stood at that penthouse window 8 months ago and handed her divorce papers without apparent regret. She wondered if he ever thought about her, about the life they could have had if he'd been brave enough to choose connection over calculation. She wondered if he regretted the choice, if he lay awake at night thinking about the woman he'd thrown away who'd become someone he could never control. Probably not. Victor wasn't built for regret. He was built for survival, for power, for making the choices that kept him on top regardless of the cost. But Lena had learned something Victor never would, that real power wasn't about controlling everything around you. It was about controlling yourself, your choices, your path forward. It was about being able to stand in a room full of people who could destroy you and know that you'd earned the right to be there. Her phone buzzed with a message from Elizabeth. Council meeting Tuesday at 9. We'll formally announce your appointment and begin discussing your proposed reforms. Prepare for resistance from the old guard. They don't like change. Lena texted back, I'll be ready. I'm used to resistance. She set down her phone and walked back to the windows, looking out at the city she'd been given authority over. Somewhere down there, Victor was running his organization, probably making calculated decisions and convincing himself they were necessary. Somewhere, the remnants of the Volkov operation were scattered and broken, a reminder of what happened when ambition exceeded strategy. And here, in this apartment she'd chosen, in this life she'd built from the ashes of a marriage that had lasted less than a day, Lena Hart stood and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not happiness, exactly. Not the fairy tale ending she might have imagined once upon a time before she understood how the world really worked, but peace with her choices, her path, her future. She'd been discarded on her wedding night by a man who thought she was disposable. She'd rebuilt herself into someone indispensable. And now, standing at dawn in a city full of possibilities and dangers and structures she was learning to reshape, Lena understood the most important truth of all. She didn't need Victor's approval or anyone else's validation. She'd chosen herself, built herself, proven herself. That was power. Real, lasting, inalienable power that no one could take away because it had never been given. It had been earned, one strategic decision at a time. The sun rose higher, painting the city in gold and shadow, illuminating a world that was hers to shape. And Lena smiled, knowing that the woman Victor had thrown away on their wedding night had become exactly what he'd feared she might. Someone who understood the game better than he did, played it more strategically, and won on her own terms. The discarded wife was gone. The director of strategic operations had taken her place. And the city, unknowing, chaotic, full of people living their lives between order and violence, would be better for it. Not perfect. Never perfect. But better. And in this world, better was the only victory that mattered.